My name is Zora Neal Hurston. I was born on January 7th, 1891 in Noda Soldier, Alabama. I was the daughter of two former slaves. My father, John Hurston, was a pastor, and he moved the family to Florida when I was very young. Following the death of my mother, Lucy Ann Potts Hurston, in 1904 when I was only 13 years old, and my father's subsequent remarriage, I lived with an assortment of family members for the next few years. I worked a variety of jobs, including working as a maid for an actress in the touring Gilbert and Sullivan group, to support myself and finance my efforts to gain an education. I earned an associate degree from Howard University in 1920. I published one of my earliest works in the university's newspaper. A few years later, I moved to New York City's Harlem neighborhood. Living in Harlem in the 1920s, I befriended Langston Hughes and Countee Cullen, among several others. Around this time, I experienced a few earlier literary successes, including placing in short story and playwriting contests in Opportunity magazine. I released my first novel, Jonah's Gourdvine, in 1934. 2 years later, I received a Guggenheim Fellowship, which allowed me to work on what would become my most famous work, Their Eyes Were Watching God, published in 1937. I wrote the novel while traveling in Haiti, where I also studied local voodoo practices. In 1942, I published my autobiography, Dust Tracks on a Road. This personal work was well received by my critics, but my life and career soon began to falter. I was charged with molesting a 10-year-old boy in 1948. Despite being able to prove I was out of the country at the time of the incident, I suffered greatly from this false accusation. I received a lot of criticism in my time by other writers. The attention focused on my controversial personality and lifestyle. Few male critics have been able to resist sly innuendos and outright attacks on my personal life, even when the work in question was not affected by my disposition on my private affairs. I was given many awards, including the Rosenwald Foundation Fellowship in 1935, Guggenheim Fellowship in 1936, Honorary Doctorate at Morgan State College in 1939, Anisfield Wolf Book Award in 1943, Distinguished Alumni Award at Howard University in 1943, and the Education and Human Relations Award at Bethune-Cookman College in 1956. Despite all of my accomplishment, I struggled financially and personally during my final decade. I kept writing, but I had difficulty getting my work published. Additionally, I experienced some backlash for my criticism of the 1955 U.S. Supreme Court decision in Brown v. Board of Education, which called for the end of school segregation. A few years later, I suffered several strokes and was living in the St. Lucie County Welfare Home. I died poor and alone on January 28, 1960, and was buried in an unmarked grave in Fort Pierce, Florida. More than a decade later, another great talent helped to revive interest in me and my work. Alice Walker wrote about me in the essay In Search of Zora Neal Hurston, published in Miss Magazine in 1975. Walker's essay helped introduce me to a new generation of readers, and encouraged publishers to print new editions of my long out-of-print novels and other writings.